Josh Pate. Josh is a sports anchor down at WLTZ in Columbus, Georgia. Josh, how are we doing this morning?
I'm doing wonderful, Travis. Funny story about Miss Webb there is down here in Columbus. This is where she's from, Phoenix City, Columbus area. And she went to Northside High School down here, which is really close to the gym a lot of us work out at. So she was, as a high school kid, early college, always over there. And so, she kind of did the pageant circuit down here. So people knew about her here before people knew about her nationally. But then when you hear Brent Musburger, kind of go down that avenue of, can I keep my kid in the room? Do I need my kid to leave the room? It kind of touched everyone down here a little bit differently than the rest of the world. I'll say that. It
was a little creepy. And I don't think it was just in West Georgia and East Alabama where that was the vibe. And I love Brent Musburger. I don't know how you create a list like the one we're talking about today on Southern Fried Sports and not have him on there, because he goes back to CBS before ESPN and ABC, and just really a lifer, and amazing to see the guy still in the game to the point where we're seeing him on some SEC network stuff that, quite frankly, Josh, doesn't seem to be at his pay grade.
I mean, you're looking live at Denton, Texas. I mean, it's not Brent Musburger. That's not the lane that he belongs in.
Yeah, that's a little bit. That's definitely the right lane on the 6 lane when you get to be into your 70s. Right. That's where they've kind of placed Brent, but it's still good to hear him. How about you, Josh? Who do you have kind of? Gosh, I hate going Mount Rushmore on you because it's so played and tired this time of year. But give us one or two duos that sort of stand out for you, if not over the last 25 years, all time. You can go back as far as you want. Who are your combos of choice?
Well, we do this segment frequently on our show down here in the offseason because everyone has an opinion on it. Mine's always been a little bit different than everyone because I was trying to think about this when I knew what I was going to talk to you about this morning. Is there anyone that I just detest? Is there anyone that I think is awful? And contrary to popular belief, networks don't hire you if you're just awful. I mean, they kind of have a pretty big goose egg to protect. So there's no one out there. And I know Lundqvist and Danielson take a lot of grief. I mean, I happen to think they're okay. But I am a big fan of the guys that came along. Musburger's one of them. Keith Jackson is definitely one of them. Ron Franklin, in the era where it was before the consultants and the PR people programmed you off an assembly line and then rolled you into a booth, basically. And so they're real people, in other words. And Keith Jackson and Bob Greasy, at least in the 90s, that's when I'm growing up, they were a fixture in my household. It's kind of, I almost think of Keith Jackson and Ron Franklin as the sound bed, to use an industry term, in my head. When I replay college football in my head, I hear Keith Jackson's voice underneath. I hear Ron Franklin's voice. I hear Vern Lundquist's voice underneath a little bit. So, those three, I think Jackson and Greasy, Franklin and Mike Godfrey's, I loved. But see, I even love Vern Lundquist and Gary Danielson. And the reason is not so much because Vern masters every roster before a game. I've just never really cared about the occasional butchering of a name. I know the players, so I don't need my play-by-play guy to necessarily have a roster memorized. Vern Lundquist, to me, has always been like going to a family reunion. I go to one every year down in Wedowee, Alabama. And we have normal people.
Isn't that the hometown? By the way, I got to stop you on. That's Ezekiel Knight, isn't it?
That sure is.
I had to stop you on Wedowee. I mean, you don't hear that one much. So, but go ahead. I'm sorry. That one got me.
Well, actually, driving down an interstate, that's how I identify city signs. It's which players come from here. So yeah, that's Zeke Knight territory. But if you go to a family reunion, it's nice to have normal people there. But if you have a reunion full of normal people, then it's not memorable. And Vern Lundquist has always been, I got a couple of crazy uncles that come to my family reunion every year. And you just let them have a pass on certain things. They're going to say 2 or 3
Well, let me ask you this, Josh. Do you let the crazy uncle say the blessing?
I don't let the crazy uncle say the blessing.
That's what we're doing with Vern. We're allowing him to bless the food. That's the equivalent that we're talking about here, Josh.
It is, Travis. Listen, I cannot defend certain aspects of Mr. Lundquist. What I'm telling you is I'm just willing to let him get away with certain things.
Okay.
Because he has that quality. I've always said, basically, here's my rule. Can I picture my play-by-play guy wearing overalls? If the answer is yes, then I like them. That's why I love the Franklins, and I love the Musburgers, and I love the Vern Lundquist. I think teams like Fowler and Herbstreit, for example, they're phenomenal. Technically, they're outstanding.
Right.
But they have that new electronic smell, when you open
classically
up the box.
Trained. There's no doubt about it. It's like listening to a guitar player that's been classically trained and then trying to listen to Hendrix, basically.
That's right. So, but I'll tell you the other thing. When you're talking about duos instead of just singular, I think that Sean McDonough, and he's
my
been
favorite
for a while, but
yeah.
he's paired up with Chris Spielman, has been for a little while now.
They were great.
Guys like Spielman, even guys like Gary Danielson. This is why I prefer guys like that. I think too oftentimes in that role, and trust me, I've done this at a much lower level. I've done some arena ball, but it's where you have to interact with coaches and call games. It's very difficult for guys to separate the fact that, hey, I want to remain buddy-buddy with these guys. I get a lot of insight. It's cool to be friends with coaches versus, well, I've got a job to do here. And I think even at the national level, at the highest level, I hear a lot of guys that put on kid gloves when talking about coaches, talking about teams, because they want to maintain that access. And I've never gotten that from Spielman, and I've never gotten it from Danielson. Love them or hate them, what they're thinking is what they're going to say 9 times out of 10, and they're not necessarily afraid to rub someone the wrong way. They don't have, is this going to tick off a coach at the forefront of their mind? So I even like guys like Spielman and Danielson fine.
I'll tell you, my favorite post Keith Jackson, and you could really put an old boot with him, and it would still be my favorite duo probably, was McDonough and Todd Blackledge.
Oh, yeah.
They were like the Nirvana. I keep making these band references. It's terrible. But they were just a year. And they were just 1999. McDonough, unfortunately, flew a little too close to the sun. Not to the extent of Kurt Cobain, thankfully. But that's all we had of those two. And they were great in 1999. They still rank as my favorite. And I'm with you on McDonough, who recently was appointed to Monday Night Football. Yeah. Obviously a huge honor for him. And it's great to see him rebound from those personal issues and get to this point, because such a talent, not just in football either, basketball, baseball. The guy can really do it all. I'm with you, too, on Ron Franklin and Mike Gottfried. I don't think for SEC fans there could have been a better transition, you tell me, from kind of the Keith Jackson era to the next one with Franklin and Mike Gottfried coming along, because they just sort of felt right in terms of trying to walk in those footsteps, those giant footsteps that Keith Jackson placed before them.
Right. Well, I see you talk about food all the time. I'm still reciting your cornbread quote from the other day to people down here in Columbus, by the way. But
you can't disrespect cornbread and expect to pull it off. Just like I said in the column, just give me 2 slabs of white bread with some sauce. But if you don't respect cornbread, people, you will end up looking very, very bad in this part of the country. So just don't attempt it if you don't respect it. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
White bread is safe. It's low risk, low reward, obviously. But if you got the ribs to back it up, you don't need the bread. Right.
And if the plate's good, like you said, if the protein's on point, all you should need is slaw, beans, and maybe a couple of slabs of bread. So don't overreach with the cornbread if you're not going to take it extremely serious. Now, we've gotten totally off topic, but go ahead with your thought.
Well, not really, because here, let me get us back on very quickly. If I am to make broadcast teams analogous to barbecue joints, kind of what I was talking about with the newer age guys is they all feel like a chain restaurant right off of I-65. I mean, you can get to it in 30 seconds. That's not what people down here. People down here don't like that. People down here want to drive 30 minutes on a state road to get to a hole in the wall in the middle of nowhere, where it's all a gravel parking lot and everyone knows everyone. And no one in Atlanta or no one in Miami, no one in Nashville's ever heard of it, but you've heard of it. And Keith Jackson is, number one, he's the kind of guy that you would meet at one of those restaurants. And number two, he has that feel. He has that down-home, authentic feel. Ron Franklin is the same way. And that's why those guys always appeal to you as if you could picture them sitting next to you in your living room. And it's no knock on the newer age guys. It's no knock, like I said, on a guy like Chris Fowler, who is a phenomenal talent. But Chris Fowler is, as you said, a classically trained, whereas Ron Franklin is more of a homegrown. Keith Jackson's more of a homegrown. And you could try your entire life and not replicate that.
The feeling I get with Chris Fowler is that the place where he is at this moment is where he would rather be than Bryant-Denny Stadium, Florida Field, Jordan-Hare, and that's Wimbledon. And good for him. I think he truly loves those events. I think they probably rank higher on his list than maybe even college football. That's just what I get from listening to him in terms of passion. You're right about Keith Jackson, but we're talking about a guy who grew up on a farm in Carrollton, Georgia.
Right.
So as Southerners, we are attracted to those guys who offer us that regional feel, which is, I think Ron Franklin's a Texan, but it's still the same, really. And so we got that feel from Ron Franklin. McDonough is kind of the wild card because he's a Northeastern guy, and I liked him better than anyone after Jackson, including Ron Franklin, who I really enjoyed during his prime. So it's weird what kind of strikes us in certain ways. And I know that looking at this poll right now, Josh, talking with Josh Pate, the sports anchor down at WLTZ in Columbus, Georgia. The poll results right now that we have, let me see if I can find this again real quick. It might help. We've got Brad Nessler and Todd Blackledge in front by a pretty good bit. So Keith Jackson and Greasy or Fouts not really getting a lot of love, 40+% for Nessler and Blackledge. And I really like both those guys, Josh. Going to be very interesting in 2017 when we see Nessler take over for Vern in the CBS booth. I think that has the potential with Danielson to be outstanding. But at the same time, while I'm not the biggest Vern Lundquist fan in terms of football, I love him behind the 16th green at Augusta National. I think there's going to be a lot of people who really, really miss Vern Lundquist.
Well, I remember the few times I've ever spoken to Gary Danielson, I remember hearing him say one time, you know, people knock him a lot, but it will take him being separated from the audience for 3 or 4 years before anyone that claims to hate him starts to realize, wow, you know, I kind of miss Vern Lundquist a little bit. And I think that to be the case because I used to complain about him too. But then I realized, you know, the guy nails a lot of the big calls. Orlando McCain has never nor will ever play for Alabama, but the guy nails the call more times than not. And that's really what I want. I wanted to ask you about this guy, though, because he's relatively new on the scene. I think that for a guy who I believe is from the Northeast somewhere, I think Joe Tessitore makes a very good attempt to try to, quote-unquote, get it with the Southern audience.
I think he does, and I think he's extremely well prepared, and it comes across in his work. I just think sometimes he tries to sell me a little too hard. You know, I appreciate enthusiasm and all those things, but yeah, I like Joe T. I do. I just sometimes I don't need as much. You don't have to try as hard. I'm already excited. I'm already engaged. He tries to take me to that next level, and I could see that if you were doing a Big South game or something like that, right. But I don't need it for the SEC, but I agree. I like Joe T. fine.
I think the reason why that doesn't show up more, because I get that from him as well, but when you've got the Gus Johnsons of the world doing basically a pro wrestling promo in the broadcast booth doing Big 12 games, then Joe Tessitore juxtaposed to that is like a Sunday sermon.
It really is, and I think you're absolutely correct in terms of placing announcers in categories. I think those two certainly go in the same box. By the way, our producer, James Hardy, points out that Ron Franklin did grow up in Hazelhurst, Mississippi. So there you go. That's that sense that we get from guys like Ron Franklin. But Josh, before we let you go, it's been a lot of fun. Let us know what you got coming up this fall. I know you stay very busy down there, and a lot of your work can be found on YouTube and other outlets, your webcast. You've got some podcast stuff coming up. Football Nightly down south, which I appear on occasionally when you can't find anybody else to fill the spot. Always a lot of fun. Let us know what's coming up for you guys down there and how we can find your stuff.
Yeah, you can find us. The Facebook page is Football Nightly Down South, and we're trying as best we can to get this thing syndicated outside of Columbus and have a lot of things on the table. There are a lot of technical things that I don't even understand, nor am I able to comment on right now. But we'll see if we can get it up there soon. Gonna launch a podcast and webcast this fall that, hey, if you have access to internet, you'll be able to get. And that'll be called Project Pate, and that'll be coming along in the very near future. So, I mean, we want to be in every college town in the South, and that's the goal, and we're trying to make it happen.
Man, if you haven't seen Josh's work, game day work especially, it's as good as any network you'll see out there. And I'm not talking about stations. I'm talking about network stuff. It's just great, great stuff. You'll want to check it out. Josh, we're going to do this again real soon. Thanks, man.
Always a pleasure.